Hi, and welcome back to another module in Advanced Strategies and Behavior Change. We are getting toward the end of this course, and it is time for us to think about taking the concepts that we've learned and taking the information from a functional behavior assessment and using it all to create a sound plan with evidence-based practices. More importantly, a plan that will work. Okay, so what we're going to try to do is link that FBA to the BIP, the Behavior Intervention Plan. So the most important things to think about is that reinforcement and those antecedents. The reinforcement is the C in the ABCs, and the antecedent is the A. First, we'll talk about reinforcement. What do we have to consider? Well, a reinforcer is something that increases the likelihood of future occurrences of a behavior. So a consequence that increases the likelihood that behavior is going to happen again because that consequence was considered good or reinforcing to the student. Now, with that said, a reinforcer is a consequence that can be applied to any behavior, a desired behavior, an undesired behavior, but this happens usually with undesired behaviors in an unplanned way. And we don't realize that what we are providing as a consequence could actually be maintaining that behavior. But also, on the other hand, reinforcement is not effective without meaningful reinforcers delivered effectively. So that's what we can control here, right? So a student engages in a behavior. Do we give them a consequence? Do we give them attention? Do we give them the toy? Do we give them the preferred activity? Do we let them escape something, a situation, a person? Or do we put those interfering behaviors under extinction and teach them new skills that we then reinforce? Think about that. Reinforcement is not effective without meaningful reinforcers being delivered effectively. Meaningful reinforcers, that means we'd have to think about the student's interests, preferences, needs, desires, and we need to deliver them effectively. So we need to notice whether we are giving the student what they want when they engage in interfering behaviors, or are we giving the students what we want to give them for the desired behaviors, right? So we want to be honed in on what the student really wants to achieve, and that's what we need to give to the desired behaviors and not to the interfering behaviors. So really that's what differential reinforcement is. Just really paying attention to how we're going to provide reinforcement in certain situations and not provide reinforcement in other situations. We have the DRO, which basically means that the student can go a certain amount of time without engaging in the interfering behavior, then reinforcement is delivered. If the student engages in the interfering behavior, time starts over and no reinforcement is given. Differential reinforcement of lower rates of behavior just means that we want to reduce the amount of behavior. We don't want to put it completely under extinction. So if a student calls out in class a lot, then we might want to keep that participation going, but we don't want it to be so overpowering. So we want to put a DRL in place and say, hey, if you will only call out 3 times, then you get reinforcement. But the student calls out 10 times, and that is not provided. DRI is the differential reinforcement of an incompatible behavior. So if a student is picking or pulling at clothes or grabbing people, an incompatible behavior would be putting their hands in the pocket because they can't do those things if their hands are in the pocket. And then you would reinforce student's hand in the pockets with whatever you've decided would be reinforcing for the student. Differential reinforcement of alternative behaviors is really just reinforcing the student doing something else more desired, more appropriate. And the key is with this one is that the reinforcement is actually the function of the interfering behavior. So if you see the student is engaging in a behavior to obtain attention, then you would use attention as a reinforcer when the student engages in more appropriate behavior. So in order for meaningful reinforcers to be available, we have to know what they are, right? So what are reinforcers? We have primary reinforcers. Those things are unconditioned that we all need to live. Food, drink, pleasure. Secondary reinforcers are conditioned. They've been paired. So we're thinking about activity reinforcers, things to do. Social reinforcers is that praise. And then material reinforcers, toys, games, etc. Tokens are less disruptive and generally can lead to a menu of items that would include each activity, social, or material reinforcers. So to help determine this, we need to select the reinforcers. We can use a stimulus preference assessment to determine what stimuli the student prefers, more preferred or lower preferred item, and what conditions those preferences values might change. And that is the antecedent thing we're going to get to later, whereas whether we're in a state of deprivation or satiation, or we have a different schedule of reinforcement in place, different reinforcers have different meanings. There are some obvious ways to determine which stimuli are preferred to be reinforcers, right? We could ask the student, hey, what do you like to do in your free time? What do you want to earn? Easy enough. Well, some students can't just cognitively come up with something. So how about we can give them some choices, give them some ideas to guide them and determine from there. We can do surveys, we could ask significant others, or we could offer them that pre-choice, offer them that pre-task choice. And then the benefit of that is they've made the choice, they've had the opportunity to make choices, and they can anticipate that there is a reinforcer available, therefore they know they should engage in the behavior that you are expecting. For students who have less verbal skills or ability to communicate, a stimulus preference assessment can be done by just having a pool of items that you believe the student could be having preference for, some things that hopefully can be age appropriate. And you just present those to the person systematically in pairs to see which ones seem to get picked more often or less often. So here's an example. Pre-task choice. This is what I'm looking for. And here are the items. What did Penny chose? Let's see, to watch the ant farm and send it home. All right, and another thing to think about, especially when you're using a DRA or differential reinforcement of alternative behaviors, we need function-based reinforcers. And that basically means that if you know the student engages in banging on the table to get attention, then they can be then told they're working for teacher attention. So they know they just need to get the work done, they're going to get lunch with the teacher. Just an example. Or if they do 3 problems, the teacher will come check on them. The function-based reinforcer. If they're trying to get out of work, if they do 2 problems and hand in a break card, they get a break. So we know we know they're working really hard to get out of work. That tantrum's not easy to put into place. So how about you just do a problem and then you get a break. So different ways to identify reinforcers is that forced choice, when you're just selecting that pool of stimuli that you want to see which one they seem to gravitate toward. You could observe the student and see what the student just naturally tends to go to and seems to prefer. You could ask them a conversation or a checklist, and you can create a menu. Why are those menus helpful? Well, because over time, different situations, the student's going to prefer things differently. So by having a menu, surely something on the menu at any given time could be seen as meaningful reinforcer to that student. All right, now let's talk about schedules of reinforcement. We have a continuous schedule, which is sometimes referred to as the CRF, and that's generally what we start with. That means that every time the student meets the goal, engages in the behavior that's desired, reinforcement is delivered. We want students to know that that reinforcement is available when they engage in that behavior. We want them to know that quickly. But over time, we want it to be more natural, so we go to a more intermittent schedule. Different intermittent schedules are the ratio, which means that every certain number of responses, the student gets reinforcement. With the fixed ratio, like when you have a set number of responses, the student kind of learns that pattern and you get that post-reinforcement pause. So a variable ratio schedule would be more preferred, as the average number of responses would provide the student access to reinforcement. Now, an interval means that the student gets reinforced after a certain number of time. Sound familiar? Sounds like a DRO procedure. So the student goes a certain number of time engaging in the desired behavior or going without engaging in the interfering behavior, then reinforcement is delivered. But again, students can get the predictability of that, and you will get what's called a fixed interval scallop. So a variable interval schedule is the average interval. So if you have a 3-minute interval, first time it's at 3 minutes, the second time it's 2 minutes, the third time it's after 4 minutes. So on average, 3 minutes. So this is just a visual diagram of different schedules of reinforcement. We start with a continuous reinforcement, and we want to move to an intermittent schedule. Depending on the behavior, it's either a ratio, or the number of times a student does something, or it's an interval, which is a certain amount of time the student does something. We have options with the fixed ratio or the variable ratio, but just remember that we get faster effects when we have variable ratio or variable interval, because of that predictability causes the student to wait it out until they know they're getting close, and then they can hurry up and get that reinforcer when they are ready. So how do you thin that schedule? This is going to be really important in your behavior intervention plan, because I want you to include this, thinking about how you're going to identify your reinforcers and then how you're going to thin that out. Like I said, we'll start with a CRF. We want to start making sure the student knows reinforcement's available for this new behavior that they're wanting to engage in. And in this case, if it's a certain number of times you want the student to do something, then you will do variable ratio of 3, 5, and then 10. Perhaps that's about how many opportunities a student has with a period. So you can go like more naturally, like once a class meeting, student will access reinforcement. In this case, with the interval, you might start with the continuous, and then a 15-minute, 30-minute, 1 hour might be for each segment of the day, and then eventually you want to do it once a day, so about every 5 hours. So what are our guidelines here? Reinforcement needs to be contingent, meaning it has to come as a consequence to a behavior. You can always pair that reinforcer, whether it's material, activity, or with a social, all right? So that helps generalize. You might run out of M&Ms in your pocket, but you always have a high five or a praise. So make sure you're pairing it so that the student knows that the meaning of the social reinforcement is important. And then the most natural reinforcers you can use is also very helpful for generalization. And of course, generally, social reinforcement is good for work behavior. What's more natural than money? Or at least some kind of economy system, so that student can earn something and be able to make decisions about how they would like to spend their tokens. Also, thinking about that first then, or grandma's rule, a preferred activity could be used to reinforce a non-preferred activity. That is grandma's rule. But just know that's why we have menus a lot of times, that the reinforcer value will change over time. So we need to be ready for that. If the student is the day after Halloween not going to want to work for candy, because probably getting sick to their stomach over candy at that point. Okay, I also want to go over the matching law. This is important. I know I've mentioned it a few times in this course, but we got to think about what it is that we're asking our students to do in comparison to what they get. It's that risk to benefit ratio that doctors think about, right? Well, the students are being asked to do something they don't want to do, or is probably difficult for them to do, or a new skill for them. What quality of reinforcement are we providing based on how versatile task or behavior may be? the magnitude, so the intensity of that reinforcement. You need to think about the timing for that delay reinforcer. How long are we expecting them to wait to get the reinforcer for what it is we're asking them to do? And then just really how hard is this task compared to what it is that we're wanting them to do to get the reinforcer. Okay, so let's move on to the cool antecedents. All right, so we have two antecedent variables. Remember the stimulus control, and that's that immediate antecedent, and that kind of triggers the behavior to occur because it indicates that reinforcement is available. The motivating operation, now that's just an environmental situation that indicates the value of that reinforcer. And remember to that satiation deprivation situation. So, discriminative stimuli are often called SDs. You remember, they're associated with learned history and that they really increase or decrease the probability that the behavior will be performed. So they signal the reinforcers available and whether it's likely to occur. You know, maybe you have this sweet librarian who always has a little trinket in her pocket to show you. She walks into your room and then SD for the students to behave in a way that they know will get a little peek into her little trinket pocket. Okay. But then there are motivating operations. And these are something that we can really take advantage of in our behavior plan. And that's really what makes it so that behaviors can become irrelevant, because motivating operations are what motivates the student to either need or not need to access that reinforcer, right? Value altering effects means that the reinforcer is no longer valuable or it's highly valuable. Behavior altering effects means that the behavior will occur in higher frequency in the case of a highly valuable reinforcer. So remember, we have unlearned motivating operations, and those are our unconditioned life needs, and then we have the learned motivating operations that have been paired with those unlearned in the past. But MOs are momentary, and a single MO could affect a lot of different behaviors. So thinking about the situation when you are hungry, so you're motivated to cook, but then touching a hot pan then makes reinforcement of food less valuable and ice on a burning hand more valuable. So it happens like that. But we have to be ready and aware. This is how it all works together. Okay. Hope that helped get you refreshed. Bye.